Hey everyone, welcome back to Coding Done. In the last video, we covered if-else statements, which help us control the flow of our code based on conditions. Today, we're going to talk about loops, but before we dive into the different types, I want to show you how much easier they make your life as a programmer. So, let's get into it. First, let's imagine we want to do something simple like print the numbers from 1 to 5. Without loops, we'd have to write something like this in our script.js. It works, but what if you wanted to print 100 numbers or more? It would be hard to copy and paste that many lines. Clearly, this approach isn't efficient. Here's where loops come in. Instead of writing the same code over and over again, loops allow us to repeat actions automatically based on certain conditions. Now, let's start with one of the most commonly used loops in JavaScript, the for loop. A for loop lets us repeat a block of code a specific number of times. Let's break down the syntax and see how it works. For initialization, condition, increment, and code to be executed. Initialization. This is where we initialize a variable. It usually starts with let or var. This happens once at the beginning of the loop. Condition. This is a condition that is checked before each iteration. If it's true, the loop continues. If it's false, the loop stops. Increment or decrement. After every loop iteration, the variable gets updated, usually incremented or decremented. Let's see this in action by writing a for loop that prints numbers from 1 to 5. Here is what happens in this loop. Initialization means we start with I being 1. Condition checks if I is less than or equal to 5. If it's true, the loop continues. Increment I++ increases I by 1 after each iteration. Code block console.log prints the current value of I. This loop will print the numbers 1 to 5 exactly like the earlier example but with much cleaner code. After I becomes 6, the condition I less or equal to 5 will be false and the loop will stop. Let's try another quick example. If you want to print numbers from 10 to 1, we just modify the initialization, condition, and increment parts like this. We start with I equal 10. The loop runs while I greater or equal to 1. After each iteration, I minus decreases the value of I by 1. This loop runs numbers in reverse order from 10 down to 1. Now, let's dive into some other loops and understand when and why to use each. The while loop is different from the for loop because it doesn't require a counter. Instead, it just keeps running as long as a certain condition is true. Here is the syntax. While condition, code to execute while the condition is true. Let's break it down with an example where we print numbers from 1 to 5 using a while loop. Here, we declare I equal 1 before the loop. The loop runs while I less or equal to 5 is true. Inside the loop, we print the value of I and then increment I using I++. Unlike the for loop, the while loop is a bit more flexible. You can use it when you don't know exactly how many times the loop should run in advance. For example, if you want to keep looping until a user enters a certain value, while would be more suitable than for. Different from for loop. For loops are ideal when you know the exact number of iterations. While loops are better when the number of iterations is uncertain and depends on some external condition. The do-while loop is like the while loop but with one key difference. It always runs at least once. This is because the condition is checked after the code block runs. Here is the syntax. Do code to be executed while the condition. Here is an example to print numbers from 1 to 5. In this case, the code inside the loop runs first and then the condition I less or equal to 5 is checked, even if the condition is false from the beginning. Difference from while loop. While loop checks the condition before running the code, so it may never run if the condition is false from the start. The while loop always runs the code at least once, regardless of the initial condition. Now that we have seen different types of loops, how do you choose the right one? Use a for loop when you know how many times you need to loop. Use a while loop when the number of loops depends on a condition that could change during execution. Use a do-while loop when you need the code to run at least once, regardless of the condition. Each of these loops is powerful in its own way, and as you practice more, you will get a feel for when to use each one. Recapitulation. So, today we explored the for, while, and do-while loops in JavaScript. Each has its own unique purpose, and choosing the right one depends on the task at hand. The for loop is great when you know exactly how many times you want to loop. The while loop is flexible when the loop depends on a condition. The do-while loop ensures your code runs at least once. Make sure to try these loops out for yourself and see how they simplify repetitive tasks. In the next video, we'll dive into loop control, mechanisms like break and continue. which lets us stop or skip iterations in a loop. This will give us even more control over how our loops run. So stay tuned, and as always, if you have any questions or run into any issues, leave a comment below. See you in the next video. Bye!